Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network. Groong, I'm Asbed Bedrossian and I'm here with Hovik Manucharyan. In this Conversations on Groong episode, we'll be talking about the alternative game model, a technical term from game theory, which experts often use in analyzing how nations negotiate and protect their national interests. So we are joined by Arthur G Martirosyan, who is a senior consultant with CM Partners. In 1994, after graduating from Yale University, he joined Conflict Management Group and Harvard Negotiation Project and has since worked in conflicts in the former Soviet Union, the Middle East, the Balkans, Africa, and Latin America. This episode is recorded on October 3rd, 2023.
Today, October 3, 2023, the civil contract-controlled Armenian National Assembly ratified the Rome Statute, the treaty that is the foundation of the International Criminal Court. This move is just one in a series of curious recent moves by the Armenian government that has angered Russia, which is considered a strategic ally to Armenia, perhaps for not too long after this move, of course. We have regularly covered the attempts by the Pashinyan regime to change the strategic foreign policy vector of Armenia, from one of a Russian satellite towards a Western-oriented one, in a time when Russia is engaged in an existential war with the US and the West. Today, we'd like to discuss with our guest the calculations that Armenian de facto authorities are relying upon in their provocatively aggressive, some would say suicidal positioning. Hello and welcome, Arthur.
Hello, Arthur.
Thank you for having me.
Arthur, in your previous interviews with us, in fact, 2 days ago, you frequently refer to the concept of an alternative game. Can you describe for the uninitiated listeners in more detail what you mean by this and how it applies to the decision-making processes in general and to Armenia specifically?
My background is, professional background is negotiation. I've been doing this for almost 30 years now. And some of the concepts and terms I'm using mostly from the methodology that has been developed at Harvard, although not limited to what's done at Harvard. I started to work with the founder of the Harvard Negotiation Project, Roger Fisher. My background, again, as I said, is professional negotiation. Negotiation is a multidisciplinary field. My primary education, forget about the English language and literature and translation. My primary education is in international relations and political science. And as a multidisciplinary field, negotiation relies on law, anthropology, psychology, and many different disciplines. So very quickly on what is meant by the alternatives game. Alternative is a very important concept in negotiations. That is, what are you going to do if you do not agree at the table with the other side? What the other side is going to do, what alternatives do they have if they disagree with you, if you cannot come to a deal at the table? So alternative is, again, what you're going to do yourself or with the others if you fail to come to an agreement with the party you're negotiating with. Alternatives game is a concept that was introduced by another teacher of mine, Howard Reifer, who taught at Harvard Business School. It has also a different name. Sometimes specialists use that name, a three-way coalition. What does it mean? Imagine a triad. There are three players. Player A is stronger than player B, and player B is stronger than player C. So that's the triad. And the question is, can player C still be able to maximize its gains if it depends on A and B, right? The stronger players. So Howard Reifer showed that that is possible. And that is possible if A and B, the more powerful players in that triad, A and B, are cooperative, right? If they're competing, but they're also cooperating. And there are spaces where they're cooperating, and therefore C, the weaker player, can go to A, find an area or niche where they have common interest, and tell them, I'm trying to simplify this, and tell them, look, A, B is proposing me this kind of a deal. That's the alternative, right? B is proposing me this kind of a deal. Can you give me better? Then I will strike the deal with you. So improve the deal that I'm getting in my alternative, and then I will strike a deal with you. Then you get what A can offer you. You go to B and you say, hey, B, remember we almost came to an agreement on this, but now I have a better offer from A. Can you improve that? And they move in that way of negotiation until they get to Pareto optimality. I'm not going to go into the quantitative side of it, how it's done and how it happens. Now, this concept is very important. It works in negotiations, again, with one caveat. A and B must be cooperating in some areas. They may be also competitors, but in some areas, important for them, they have cooperation. If there is no cooperation, however, if the game is competitive or zero-sum, that is, A and B are in an existential fight over who's going to survive. And one's win is the other side's loss. Or A cannot win if B doesn't lose, and the other way around. If that's the structure of the triad or the dynamic in the triad, C cannot play that kind of a game because both A and B are pushing C to take a side or build a coalition with them, be in their camp rather than in A camp, and the other way around. And once C makes that kind of a choice, there is a risk that it's going to be punished by the side that was not chosen. So if C chooses A, B is likely to punish them for that move, and the other way around. C chooses B, A is likely to punish them for not choosing them. This is the alternative game. Now, what do I mean when I apply this to our situation? Very simple. A, B, one can argue who is more powerful. I'm not going to go into that. Let's say that US is A, or the West is A, Russia is B, Armenia is C, right? So this game for Armenia would make sense if there were cooperative spaces between A and B, that is United States or the West and Russia.
Okay, and wasn't that the case maybe during the OSCE Minsk group years?
Exactly. So when there is that kind of cooperation between them, they can come even to a consensus. And the so-called Lavrov plan, named after Lavrov, but essentially we understand that, or the Madrid principles or whatever, that there was a consensus. Their interests, some ways, they aligned their interests, the mediators, and said that this is the best package, the option that we have on the table right now. Both sides, for various reasons, didn't like it, right? I mean, Aliyev would not accept it. Armenians would not accept it. But they, the bigger players, let's simplify it, right? I'm not going to go that there are three players there, Minsk group. But the West and Russia come to some kind of an agreement that this is what would meet their interests. And that happens, still continues even, right? Strangely, after 2014, when relations started to sour significantly and even got to a confrontational line between Russia and the West, sanctions and whatnot, but they still maintained some spaces where they cooperated. I think the last space where they cooperated was space. Sorry for the pun. So yes, the cooperation in the space, and even now, I mean, some areas exist, but they are almost. The last thing that Russians stopped cooperating on was, I think, uranium. They still have diplomatic relations. Nominally, they are not at war. They haven't declared war to each other. But we know that the spaces where they cooperate are non-existent. And we know that both sides, that's Camp A and Camp B, want Armenia to align with their interests, be part of their camp, right? So say. So this situation, again, changed, and it changed dramatically. The dynamic became confrontational in 2022, and therefore Armenia trying to continue to play that kind of a game, right? Signing for the camp of democracies, for instance, or becoming a member of a group of countries supporting Uyghuristan, State Department. I mean, these are moves that clearly are demonstrating that you have intentions to be in that club. yes, Armenian policymakers, if they can be called that, policymakers can tell Russians, oh, no, we didn't really want to be against you. This is not against you. This is in our national interest. That's all, but it's not against you. But that's not how in this case, Russia has been seeing this, right? I mean, these are moves clearly against them. Why didn't they make a big fuss about it? It's a whole different story, right? Why Russians? Because they needed Pashinyan. First, they needed him because they thought he's still going to stay in their camp, all the levers they have. He comes to power and they say, even better. Sarkisyan had legitimacy issues internally because for any external player, again, negotiation 101, an external player, it's obvious that if there is a package options on the table, the parties need to do two things. They need to agree to it in principle, but they have to run even more important negotiation internally. That is on two tracks, right? I need to negotiate with Azerbaijan and the OSCE Minsk group, but I also need to come back to my own people and say, this is the best deal, accept it. And that's often the most difficult negotiation, right? You have to negotiate internally. And they thought that it would be easier for Pashinyan to negotiate internally because he has all that support now. They miscalculated, or they thought that that's going to be happening. It didn't happen. Pashinyan said that he was negotiating from his own point. He dismissed the plan. He called the Madrid principles almost an anti-Armenian piece on the table. I'm not going to go into the details, but he didn't accept it. Now, important in this, again, about alternatives, Russians, and not only them, because there was a consensus among the mediators, they were putting on the table this package, and their message to Armenians, and now to Pashinyan, before that was to Sarkisyan, was, look, this is not the best option probably, or package of options for you, and not the maximal, the one that satisfies your interest. Maximal is to keep all the lands around Karabakh, maybe even getting Shahumyan liberated, whatever is your maximal. This is not. It's minimally satisfies your interests, and it's better than your alternative. What is your alternative? They were saying the alternative, if you do not accept the deal at the table, is either keep the status quo, right? Continue the status quo, or a war. Now, let me stop here because I'm going to be getting back to the concept of alternatives maybe later. But for now, it's important to understand that the alternative to a negotiated deal was either status quo or a war.
Okay, let's examine this situation with today's developments specifically. Pashinyan has been claiming that Russia has betrayed Armenia multiple times, citing the, quote, inability or unwillingness, unquote, of Russia to intervene during previous cases of Azerbaijani attacks on Armenia proper. Pashinyan has furthermore criticized Russian peacekeepers in Artsakh, whom he blames for allowing Azerbaijan to encroach upon Armenian-held lands over and over, culminating in the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh in a matter of weeks. Pashinyan claimed that these incidents led Armenia towards the path of seeking alternative security guarantees, and he also claimed that that was also why Armenia ratified the Rome Statute, just today, as a matter of fact. It's interesting because he claimed that Russia's lack of security guarantees led Armenia to ratify the Rome Statute, but also other apologists for this policy say that the Rome Statute is in Armenia's best interest because it allows Armenia to prosecute Azerbaijani criminal activities. Shouldn't Armenia be able to do that, and shouldn't Armenia be able to pursue its interests with regard to the ICC without being in fear of Russia retaliating? And how would the alternative game apply in this context?
Well, the alternative game, again, we can continue to analyze this situation. So if Pashinyan made up his mind to now move from B to A, right, for whatever reasons, he needs to prepare the public opinion for that move. And as I said, in that triad of A, B, and C, if there is confrontation between A and B, sooner or later, you're going to be forced to join one or the other camp. Now, he claims that he was in the camp with Russia. And because Russians failed on their obligations and commitments, he's now moving to Camp A. That's what he's saying, right? Essentially. And he needs to justify that move. He needs to prepare the public opinion. And not like Russians are not giving him ample ammunition to be saying what he's saying. And yet, as an international relations specialist, I will say that the blame game is not something that really is going to help you satisfy your interests, right? Because Russians are blaming him for what happened. And I listened to both sides, and I can say that Russians also have some grounds in what they're saying. You wanted us to be more Armenian than you are. You didn't stir a finger to protect Artsakh Armenians. You said that you are washing your hands off. It's a matter between Baku and Stepanakert. And you want us to jeopardize our own national interests now that we are in this existential fight with the West. And you think we are gullible enough to make those kinds of moves? No, we are going to satisfy our interests, even if that happens at your interests, Armenia, because our interests are more important for us. And you left no space for us to take into consideration your interest even at a minimal level. If you are betraying us, if you are making moves that are damaging not only your interests, but our own interests, all right? Because if you are saying that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan, it means that it's over. The Russian mediation is over. You are accepting the mediation of A, right? Now A is the player for you, and you want B to continue to provide you some services. And as I said, you can get into a very tricky part of this game when either A or B are going to punish you for perceived or actual disloyalty.
Yeah, double talk.
Right. I mean, and this is why, and let me add one more complication to this game. If Armenia were alone playing this game in this triad, it would be probably simpler. But we also have Azerbaijan and Turkey, right, in that game. And all I'm saying is Azeris and Turks could not even dream about this policy of Armenia. Why? Because if you're accepting this alternative game, they can satisfy short-term interests of the West and of Russia much better than Armenia. So you go now to the West, and the West says, oh, Armenians, we praise your democracy, human rights, oh, we condemn this and this, but their interests are better met by Azerbaijan and the West. Armenians go to Russia, and Russia says, oh, you are our historical, strategic partner, blah, 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 but their interests are better met by Azerbaijan and Turkey. You get yourself in a game where it's a zugzwang. You are doomed on track A and on track B. And Azeris and Turks could see that, and Pashinyan and his many advisors were pushing him to play that game.
Arthur, let's remove Armenia from the picture for now, and let's consider Azerbaijan and its relations with A and B. Okay, so how does Azerbaijan maintain its brinkmanship, I would say, or its aggressive policy, both towards the West and Russia, without suffering the same consequences that Armenia did? For instance, it was able to kill 6 peacekeepers in the attack on Artsakh, and not even a slap on the wrist from Russia. It's able to, we saw the picture with when Yuri Kim and Samantha Power were, sort of, looking at Aliyev, begging with their eyes to do something. It seemed like, and Aliyev just was like smiling, and he frequently, like whenever the OSCE Minsk Group visitors have visited him after 2020, he basically said, I have nothing to tell you, you can leave.
Yeah.
So how does Azerbaijan maintain that?
Right. I mean, the answer is very simple, and I already gave it. They are in a position to better satisfy the interests of both these parties. It's the interests, right? If Russians could start a war with Georgia over killed peacekeepers in South Ossetia, In this case, mere apologies were enough, right? Turkey ambassador gets assassinated in Ankara after some brouhaha with the diplomatic tough language and whatnot, and maybe some sanctions. We are not buying your tomatoes. Our tourists are not traveling to Turkey. After a very short period, they're back on track, okay? Did Erdogan apologize? Yes, sort of apologized, and they continue. Their pilot that gets killed in Syria, beheaded, a hero, Russian hero, but they kind of forgive Turkey for that. Any analyst looking at this should be asking you a question: why is this happening? And the answer is obvious. It's because that player, in this case Russia, has important interests, or those interests are perceived as important, and even dependencies, I would say, which are vulnerable and sensitive. And for them, these are more important than in that relationship than kind of the symbolic or other things that the population expects, right? I mean,
Okay.
Are you taking tough measures? Our ambassador was killed. Are you taking tough measures? Our 6 peacekeepers, including the deputy commander, was killed. No, they don't. And if they don't, you need to ask yourself a question: what is the structure of those interests, and what is the hierarchy of those interests? Now, does Russia have many interests with Azerbaijan and Turkey? They do. Does the West have many interests in Azerbaijan and Turkey? They do. Is it still possible for Armenia to play when these players have this many interests? Yes, it is possible, but you need a very astute and very qualified diplomacy to be doing that, because you still can find interests where long-term or mid-term, they still may need you. They still may act out of their interests in your favor. But to do that, you need really to work hard in negotiation. If you cannot do that, and Pashinyan is not capable of doing that. His foreign affairs minister is a nobody. He's someone brought from the street to become diplomat number one. Can you imagine any country, even not in crisis, that would, out of political reasons, appoint people who have no diplomatic experience to present your country in A and B, in Russia and the West? Of course not. So I don't buy the argument. I've been hearing this, it doesn't matter. Russians, Azerbaijan and Turkey have so important interests that it doesn't matter what we'd be doing. It doesn't matter what government there'd be in Yerevan. This would be happening. So this kind of a fatalism and determinism. And I think these people are trying to support Pashinyan's government, no matter what they do, right? It says, it doesn't really matter who'd be running our diplomacy. This would be happening anyway. No, it wouldn't. Because, again, as I said, in that game, had they read the game right in the beginning, they probably would have played it very differently with Russia. Number one. Number two, why Georgia can play that game smarter, right? When there are this many uncertainties, why are you sticking your neck to A or B be punishing you? You need strategic patience and pause, right? I don't know how this fight between A and B is going to end. Why am I sticking my neck? Because some other players, both internally and externally, or the ones who are internal but play the game of the external players, are constantly pushing Armenia one side or the other side. And my formula has been very simple. In times of uncertainty, critical uncertainty especially, but for a small country like Armenia, probably axiomatically, you don't need to be anti-Russian or anti-Western, pro-Western or pro-Russian. You need to stay pro-Armenian, period. But to do that, you need again, as I said, diplomacy, and the ability of your diplomats to negotiate is going to be extremely important. And I must say that Aliyev, in 30 years, let's say with his father 30 years, but he alone, let's say for 20 years, he's been paying a lot of attention to what caliber diplomats is developing, what experience they gain. He's not changing them and bringing someone and nobody from a DJ to become your foreign policy decision maker. That's the difference. And that makes a difference. Makes a whole lot of difference.
Arthur, generally, I think that Pashinyan is making a large number of wrong choices for Armenia. Of course, he's the one who has the most amount of information, access to this information based on which he makes these choices. You and I and Hovik do not have access to a lot of national security information that he does.
Right.
Let's assume for a moment that Pashinyan is a rational actor making rational choices. What would be the premises from which he is making the decisions for them to be rational in the sense that we consider them as protecting Armenian national security interests? And second question, let me quickly also ask that one. What promises would have been made to him to form a basis for relying on the US and the EU as security alternatives to Russia for Armenia? Essentially, from your conversation a moment earlier, his basis for switching from B to A, what promises would have had to be made to him to do this?
Let me start with the rational choice. Although rational choice school had a significant influence on the Harvard methodology, right? And the premise was that if all humans are rational, then if I'm putting on the table a better deal for you than your alternative, your walk away option, or what you're going to do alone or with other parties, this is a better deal. You will accept the better deal because you are rational. And obviously that theory has been debunked because humans are not. They can be rational, but most of the time they're not. And there are cultural variables. There are also emotions at play, values and whatnot, right? So I'm not going to go into that now because the field and even Harvard negotiation school have moved beyond just rational choice.
Mm-hmm.
If he were a rational choice actor, as I said, in that triad, he'd quickly understand that if I enter this kind of a game, it's going to be utilized with more players with more power, and they probably going to act at my expense to satisfy their interests with Azerbaijan and Turkey, right? So I would not enter that kind of a game if I were rational. Now, obviously, I mean, he had his own positioning, ideological positioning. He came as an anti-Russian player, right, into politics, pretty much as an anti-Russian.
Yes, he did.
Then he switched. He made a 180 turn, and he said, "Oh, we are the best allies with Russia." Now he's saying, "Oh, Russians, even in 2016 and before, they were not loyal. They were allowing this and this and this." Now, my question is, when did you find out that Russia has interest and the depth of those interests with Azerbaijan and Turkey? Did you find out about it in 2018 when you came to power? Did your intelligence tell you about how important that relationship is to Russians? Did your intelligence tell you how important Israel's interests are in this region, and who of the neocons and neoliberals in Washington, no matter what, is going to support those interests? Did they tell you? Did you understand the game? I mean, if you didn't, it's because either you are uncouth and you are unable to do that, period. And you should have stepped down, right? You made this glorious velvet revolution, and then you recognize your capabilities are not sufficient. You step out, right? You say, okay, we change the government. But not only he stayed in power, but he uses the structure, the system, political system that was designed by his predecessors to keep the power. It's a perfect mechanism for anyone who's in power to keep power. Has nothing to do with representative democracy because it allows you with 25% of support to stay in power and to have a monopoly on power. And that's what he's doing. So my reading of what he's doing is much simpler. His real and top interest is to stay in power no matter what, even if Armenia's national interests are at stake. If that allows him to stay in power, that's his top interest. And that's why when now, as a negotiator, I approach any negotiations, I'm trying to understand what are the interests. And if we think that there are no personal interests, we're making a huge mistake. You have to understand what are his interests. What's at stake for him. and he wants to stay in power. And if he sees now that going from Russia to the West gives him a better chance to survive, right? Because he's saying, oh, internally, I was not able to sell it, to negotiate. Many Armenians disagree with what's happening. Even more Armenians probably worldwide disagree if he starts now his moves from flirting with Turkey to in bed with Turkey, right? So he knows all of that. And therefore, to stay in power, the West can give him more assurances and guarantees than anybody else. He can apply now force. Law enforcement is entirely under him, and security is under him. And he can apply as much force as necessary. And the West will still keep calling him Democrat and Armenian regime democracy, as long as he does what's in the West's interest. And the West's primary interest is to kick Russians out of the region. Now, is that in our interest? I mean, I know what our national interests are. And again, switching from one camp to another, they're using these lofty words, security architecture. Mm-hmm. I'm sure their advisors have heard the buzzwords, but they don't understand how it works. You cannot build security architecture in a jiffy, right? You wake up next morning and the French come with their Legion, Americans with their Abrams and F-35s, and you have now a new security system in place. It's not happening that way. And the most problematic piece here is that when you are making that transition, you are at the weakest. And it would be a huge mistake for Turks and Azeris not to use that opportunity. Mistake or whatever you may call it.
Right.
But they're looking at this as a perfect opportunity for them to get what they want now, even without applying military force. But they're not ruling out the military force. So they hang over his head the military force. I was just watching him talk to the French Foreign Affairs Minister on her visit to Armenia. I didn't watch the whole thing. But what is he saying? He's saying that unfortunately, the international mechanism didn't prevent the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh. Right? Okay. When did you find out that these mechanisms are not able to do that? You didn't realize that the world order is not only in a turbulent state, it's not even anarchic, it's chaotic. You didn't realize that? And you were making moves, and back to the Rome Statute, you still are making moves, hoping that the international community, international law, Court of Justice are going to forget about punishing Azerbaijan for the past, because you are not going to do that. You keep negotiating with them. And when you negotiate with someone whom you think of as a war criminal, you are telling him
you're
that
justifying
you accept
them.
what he's doing. So is he negotiating with them or he's not negotiating? Is he telling the mediators, and it doesn't matter if the Russians are mediating or the West is mediating, that he cannot negotiate in good faith with Azerbaijan about the peace deal as long as Azerbaijan keeps Armenian citizens in captivity, right? No, not doing that. So if you are negotiating with Azerbaijan, despite what it's doing, essentially you're saying, I'm fine with that. Or with one hand, you are saying, oh, Aliyev, I have now a real tool here that I'm going to be punishing you with. And Aliyev knows it's a bluff. It's not a real alternative. One of the biggest mistakes negotiators make, they exaggerate their alternative or they bluff with the alternative. They don't have the alternative, but they tell the other side, oh, we're going to have now the French Legion come here and do this. Oh, we're going to do this and this. And they think that diplomacy is about bluffing. It is not. Because once your bluff is removed, once the other side sees that you are bluffing, you are in a very perilous condition. And you cannot bluff with Russians, because I'm sure they know much more about what's happening within his own cabinet, if not in his bedroom, than he thinks they do. And that's the problem for our nation. that we have a leader who is incompetent, but he acts as if this is a game in one of the Yerevan streets, right? I mean, I can bluff here, I can do this here. It doesn't work that way in.
Okay, thank you, Arthur. We're going to leave it there for today. Thanks for coming back on the show for this technical conversation.
Thank you very much, Arthur.
Thank you. Hope it was useful. Thank you.
Great. It was great.
Cheers. Bye.
Okay, that was our show. We hope you found it informative. Please find us on social media and follow us, like us, subscribe to us, and so on. You can find our links on our profile pages. Thanks, and talk to you soon.